The mother gave birth to 5 children, but they were all deaf-mute 25 years later. Nobody in Pine Valley remembered the exact day Rachel Carter gave birth to her children. What they remembered was the silence, that eerie, unsettling silence that came not just from the hospital room, but from the days that followed. No cries, no wails, no screams of life, just quiet, too quiet. Rachel had given birth to 5 babies, beautiful, healthy-looking infants, but none of them cried at birth. Nurses exchanged looks. Doctors cleared their throats awkwardly. They told Rachel everything was fine, that maybe the babies were just calm, maybe just tired. But Rachel knew something was off. When they were placed on her chest, all 5 swaddled tightly and breathing steadily, they looked at her, but made no sound. No movement except for the rhythmic rise and fall of their tiny chests. She stared at them, heart pounding in a mixture of wonder and dread. By the time she returned home, a week later, rumors had already started to spread. Pine Valley was a small place, the kind where everyone knew what kind of bread you liked before you even walked into the bakery. It didn't take long for word to get around. "Something ain't right," one woman said to another at the market. "I heard..." Not one of them cried, not even once. "I heard they can't hear," whispered another. Not a single one of them, the whole batch. It was like wildfire, but slower, meaner, burning steady beneath smiles and false pleasantries. Rachel, exhausted and raw from labor, didn't notice at first. She walked through town with her double stroller and custom-wrapped twins in arms, 5 heads bobbing gently in front of her as she made her way to the pharmacy. At first, people smiled politely, said, "Congrats," or "God bless you." But then the looks changed. The smiles didn't reach their eyes. Some turned their backs. Others crossed the street. At the pharmacy, the woman behind the counter suddenly remembered she had something urgent in the back room and left Rachel standing there for 15 minutes. At the park, children were ushered away from the baby stroller with urgent whispers from their mothers. Rachel began to feel it in her bones. Something was shifting. Not just tired new mother paranoia. Something real, tangible, cold. By the 2nd week, she stopped getting invitations to the local mothers group. By the 3rd, her neighbor stopped answering the door when she knocked to return. A borrowed casserole dish. The silence around her deepened. And for someone now raising 5 children who would never hear her voice, the irony was unbearable. She tried to brush it off, told herself people just didn't know how to act around someone with quintuplets, that it was probably just small-town awkwardness. But then her husband Derek came home one night, slamming the door a little too hard, his face pale. "They're saying things at the quarry," he muttered, dropping his lunch pail. Rachel looked up from the sink, wiping formula off her sleeve. "What kind of things?" she asked. Derek hesitated. "That maybe we were cursed, that no one has that kind of luck. 5 at once? All silent?" Rachel blinked. "Luck?" she repeated. "They think this is luck?" Derek didn't answer. He just sat down at the table, rubbing his forehead. That night, Rachel barely slept. Not because of the babies, who were calm as always, but because of what she now realized. The town wasn't just talking, it was judging. 2 days later, it happened. She was at the church, the very church where she and Derek were married, where her parents had baptized her. She brought the babies in for Sunday service, hopeful they'd be welcomed, prayed for, maybe even blessed. But when she walked in, something was off. The chatter stopped. The organist froze mid-note. Father Green cleared his throat and stepped forward. "Mrs. Carter," he said, eyes darting to the crowd. "Perhaps, for today, it might be best if the children stay outside." Rachel stared at him. "Excuse me?" she asked. "They're babies." "Yes, but they might be disruptive," he said, voice trembling. "But they don't make noise," Rachel said, holding back a rising storm in her chest. "They don't cry. They don't scream. They can't." The silence that followed was worse than a slap. People shifted in their pews, embarrassed, but not one defended her. She left without saying a word, pushed the stroller through the gravel courtyard, head held high, eyes burning. The sun was bright that day, and it felt like the whole world could see her shame. That night, she sat on the edge of her bed while the babies slept soundly. Derek was in the other room, fixing a leaking pipe, cursing under his breath. Rachel looked at the ceiling and felt something inside her fracture. Not break, just shift. She wasn't angry. Not yet, but she was aware now. She knew what Pine Valley had decided about her family, that they were different. And different, in a town like this, was dangerous. Over the next few weeks, the walls closed in. The grocery store suddenly ran out of the formula brand she needed. A man in a pickup truck nearly ran her off the road as she pushed the stroller down Main Street. At the laundromat, someone scrawled "Demon Seed" on the folding table in red marker. She scrubbed it off, biting her lip until it bled. Even the mailman stopped delivering her letters, claiming their dog barked too much. They didn't own a dog. Derek started working longer hours. Rachel noticed he came home with his clothes dirtier than usual, hands scraped more than they should be. He didn't talk much anymore. She didn't ask. Neither of them wanted to say it aloud, but they knew. Pine Valley wanted them gone. And through it, all the children remained quiet, peaceful, beautiful. Liam stared at lights like he understood their language. Noah mimicked his father's frown. Grace laughed soundlessly when Rachel tickled her feet. Ben and Ava clung to each other even in sleep. They were alive. They were real. And they were hers. Rachel knew she could endure anything, as long as she could protect them. But something told her that wouldn't be enough. Not in this town. Not in Pine Valley. Because Pine Valley had already made up its mind. And when a town makes up its mind, it stops listening. And when it stops listening, it starts acting. Rachel didn't know it yet, but this was just the beginning. The silence wasn't a phase. It was a sentence. And if she didn't fight back, Pine Valley would make sure her children didn't just grow up in silence. They'd disappear into it completely. Rachel Carter had always been the kind of woman who stood firm when others crumbled. Before the babies came, she managed the house, handled finances, kept the garden alive through 3 droughts, and patched her husband's work shirts by hand. She was sharp, direct, but kind. The sort of person who brought soup when someone lost a parent, but never stayed long enough to make anyone uncomfortable. That was who she was before. Now she was that woman with the silent babies. And no one in Pine Valley let her forget it. The labels came quickly, quietly, but persistently. She felt it in every awkward smile, every neighbor who waved from a distance, but never crossed the street to talk. She felt it in the way shopkeepers suddenly couldn't break a $20 bill, or how her name was always the last called at the town food drive. Her husband, Derek, didn't talk about it much, but Rachel saw the way his shoulders slumped when he walked in the door. At night, after the babies were asleep, he'd sit on the porch and stare into the distance, sipping beer like it was medicine. Rachel never asked what he was thinking. She already knew. They both understood the truth. They were being pushed out, gently but relentlessly. No one had to say it. The cold shoulders, the closed doors, the sudden lack of work, it all spoke louder than words ever could. And what made it worse was how careful everyone was about it. No one yelled at her. No one threw things. Pine Valley was too polite for that. They just withdrew, slowly, strategically, like water receding from the shore before a tsunami. Rachel fought it the only way she knew how, by holding on tighter. Every morning she dressed the babies, made breakfast, swept the porch, and walked into town like nothing was wrong. She smiled at people who refused to meet her eyes. She said hello to children who were pulled behind their mothers like they might catch a disease just by waving. She did not flinch, not in front of them, not ever. Inside, though, the cracks were forming. At night, she would rock Grace in her arms while silently, mouthing lullabies. Sometimes she cried so softly even the babies didn't notice. The tears were quiet, like everything else in her house, but they were real, and they were hers. When the twins, Liam and Noah, turned 3, Rachel decided to enroll them in preschool. She knew they couldn't speak and that they struggled to follow verbal instruction, but they were bright, smarter than most kids she'd seen. They understood routines, could point to pictures, recognized shapes, numbers, emotions. They communicated with gestures, looks, and sounds from their throats that weren't quite words but carried weight. Rachel believed that if they were included, if teachers made a little effort, the boys would thrive. She made an appointment with the director of Pine Valley Preschool, and walked in with hope clenched in her fist like a paper application. But the moment she mentioned her boys were deaf, the director's smile froze. "We're not equipped," she said, trying to sound apologetic. "Maybe a special facility would be better." Rachel asked where the nearest such facility was. 3 hours away, the woman replied. "In the city." Rachel left the building slowly, trying not to shake. She didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. But inside, she was unraveling. Her babies were being erased. Not hurt, not abused. Erased. Denied existence in schools, churches, parks, birthday parties. Pine Valley had drawn a circle and kept them outside it. She tried to fight. Wrote letters. Called the state office. Filed applications for support programs. Weeks passed. Months. Every request hit a wall. Either her case wasn't urgent, or it got lost, or the funding wasn't there. She realized that while she was fighting for her children's place in the world wasn't even acknowledging their presence. Then came the worst moment yet. One morning, she took Grace and Ava to the local clinic for routine checkups. The receptionist, a woman Rachel had spoken to dozens of times, glanced at her, then lowered her voice to the nurse. "Shouldn't she go somewhere else? That place for—" She didn't finish the sentence, but Rachel heard enough. The nurse avoided her eyes. They made her wait 3 hours before saying the doctor had to cancel. But Rachel saw him in the hallway, laughing with another patient. Grace kept patting her mother's cheek, curious about her tears. Rachel smiled down at her, brushed her hair back, and left. But the feeling lingered. They didn't want her family to be seen, not even in a place of healing. Rachel returned home and found Derek in the yard, fixing a broken water line. "They turned us away," she said flatly. He didn't look up. "Of course they did," he muttered. She walked past him into the house, set Grace down, and stood in the kitchen staring at the wall for nearly 5 minutes. She could hear the soft rustle of movement upstairs, the others waking from naps. Her children were growing, learning, becoming, and this town had already decided who they were. That night, she made a decision. If no one was going to fight for her children, she'd do it alone. Not quietly, not politely. She would make them see her family. She started small, took the babies to the park every day, no matter how many stares she got, signed to them, publicly, played games, brought snacks. She knew people were watching. Let them. If they wanted a show, they were going to get one. When someone asked, "Why don't they talk?" Rachel smiled and replied, "Because they're listening in ways you'll never understand." Sometimes, it shut them up. Other times, it started a whisper. But at least they were looking, not pretending her family didn't exist. It wasn't justice, but it was a start. Derek began changing too. Quiet at first, then steadily more distant. He worked extra shifts. Sometimes didn't come home until after midnight. Rachel didn't confront him. Not yet. She knew he was breaking in his own way. A man who'd grown up believing hard work earned respect. Now watching that belief crumble in the eyes of a community that no longer respected him or his family. She didn't blame him, but she knew this burden was becoming hers alone. And she carried it, not because she wanted to, but because no one else would. Then came the eviction notice. A letter tacked to their front door with a thumbtack. "We regret to inform you," it began. They had 60 days to leave. No reason, no warning, just gone. Rachel crumpled the letter in her fist, stood on the porch with the wind against her face, and swore out loud. For the first time in years, she didn't care who heard. The babies didn't flinch. They didn't need to hear her words to understand her anger. They felt it in her body, her tension, her hands shaking as she held them. They looked, up at her, calm, trusting, and Rachel knew one thing for certain. She would burn the whole damn town down before she let it erase them. Before the silence, Rachel Carter's life wasn't perfect, but it was hers. She and Derek had scraped together every dollar to buy a small farmhouse at the edge of Pine Valley, with chipped paint and a yard full of overgrown weeds. It was nothing fancy, but it was a start. They painted the nursery, together with second-hand rollers and cheap pastel paint, laughing as Derek spilled more on himself than the walls. Rachel planted sunflowers along the fence, not because she liked flowers, but because her mother once told her they grew strong even in bad soil. She wanted that. for her family. At Yale night, Derek would fall asleep with his hand on her belly, and she'd whisper to the child growing inside her about all the dreams she had. They had no idea what was coming. No warnings, no signs, just hope. The first pregnancy was a surprise, but a joyful one. Rachel felt ready, excited even. The second pregnancy came too soon after, but she told herself they'd manage. Then came the third, the fourth, the fifth. At first, Rachel thought it was a mistake. How could it even be possible? The doctor confirmed it. 5 children, all developing, all alive. Quintuplets. Derek sat in stunned silence. During the appointment, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. Rachel laughed nervously, her voice too high. It didn't feel real. They drove home in silence, the weight of it pressing down on them. Later that night, Derek cracked a beer and said, "Well, I guess we're gonna need a bigger crib." Rachel didn't laugh that time. She stared at the wall, wondering how she was going to be a mother to 5 children at once. The town's reaction to the news was initially shock, followed by curiosity. People came by with hand-me-downs and casseroles. The local paper did a small write-up. Pine Valley couple, expecting 5. There were smiles then, handshakes, even a donation jar at the diner. But as the months dragged on, the excitement faded. People stopped asking how she was doing. Rachel noticed fewer visitors, fewer casseroles. It was as if the town realized it had made a promise it didn't want to keep. The day she gave birth, the hospital had a skeleton staff. Only one nurse stayed the full shift. Rachel remembered every detail, the cold stirrups, the blinding lights, the numb exhaustion. She remembered the silence most of all. 5 babies. No crying. Just a room filled with the mechanical hum of machines and the heavy breathing of stunned doctors. Back home, Rachel tried to focus on the routines, feedings, diapers, sleep schedules. She created a rotation chart taped to the fridge, color-coded bottles, labeled drawers for each child. She worked like a machine, moving from one baby to the next, never resting, always alert. Derek tried to help, but the strain was already changing him. He'd stand in the doorway holding one of the twins, staring at nothing. Rachel pretended not to notice. She told herself they'd find a rhythm, that soon the babies would start cooing, crawling, speaking. But days turned into weeks, and not a single sound came from any of them. Rachel clapped, sang, shook rattles. Nothing. They watched her with wide, curious eyes, but never reacted to sound. She brought them to the doctor. Hearing tests, evaluations, more silence. The diagnosis came like a stone through a window. Profound bilateral hearing loss for all 5. She left the clinic in a daze, pushing the stroller through the parking lot with numb fingers. Derek was waiting in the truck, chewing his fingernail, eyes locked on the rearview mirror. She got in, closed the door, and said, "They can't hear us." He blinked. "Any of them?" She shook her head. He didn't speak, just turned the key and drove. That night they sat at the kitchen table, not touching their dinner. The babies slept upstairs, silent as ever. Derek finally spoke. "We'll figure it out." Rachel looked at him, eyes hollow. "Will we?" she asked. "Because I don't know how." It wasn't anger in her voice, just exhaustion. He reached for her hand, but she pulled away. She didn't mean to. She just couldn't fake hope anymore. Not that night. Despite everything, Rachel tried to adapt. She ordered books on sign language, downloaded videos, practiced in the mirror after the kids went to bed. She made flashcards, posted them on the fridge, walls, bathroom mirror. She signed milk before every feeding, sleep before every nap. She celebrated the first time Grace signed back. It was clumsy, fingers awkward, but it was communication. It meant they were still reachable, still human, not broken, just different. Rachel clung to that idea like a lifeline. If she could learn their language, maybe she could teach others. Maybe the town wouldn't see them as cursed, but as kids, just kids, with a different way of being. The problem wasn't the children. It was the world around them. The school refused to accept them. The church avoided them. The neighbors whispered. Pine Valley didn't have a place for what it didn't understand. Rachel could feel the town turning colder with each passing day. But before the silence became isolation, there were moments, small, fleeting, that reminded her why she fought. Like when Noah reached up and traced her face with his tiny fingers, or when Ava crawled into her lap and signed Mama for the first time. Rachel lived for those moments. They were proof that love didn't need sound. That family could exist outside of what the world called normal. Still, the fear never left her. It hid in the background, like a shadow. What would happen when the kids got older? When they started asking questions she didn't know how to answer? When they realized how cruel the world could be? Rachel didn't have answers. She only had instinct. And her instinct told her to protect them at all costs, even if it meant standing against everyone she once called neighbor, friend, or family. She didn't know how yet, but she would find a way. She had to. One evening, as the sun dipped, behind the trees and painted the farmhouse in gold, Rachel sat on the porch with Liam and Grace in her arms. They watched the trees sway, birds fluttering in the sky. She signed "Bird," and Grace smiled, signing it back. Liam watched his sister, then copied her. Rachel smiled through tears. Before, the silence. This would have been just another evening. Now, it was a victory. A quiet, stubborn victory. And Rachel knew deep down that these children, her children, were going to change everything. Rachel Carter had always believed in confronting problems head-on, but as the walls began closing in around her family, she realized that some doors wouldn't just close. They would slam shut in her face and stay that way. The first one came when she tried to enroll her eldest two, Liam and Noah, in Pine Valley Elementary's pre-kindergarten program. She dressed them in clean clothes, packed snacks in little paper bags, and even tied name tags to their shirts with safety pins. She walked them into the school holding their hands, her heart full of hope. Maybe, just maybe, the town was ready to move past their fear. But as soon as she sat across from the school administrator, that hope began to evaporate. Mrs. Gleason, the school secretary, wore a strained smile. "We don't have the resources for children like yours," she said softly, as if the euphemism made it any kinder. Rachel didn't understand at first. "Children like mine?" she repeated. "You mean deaf children?" Mrs. Gleason nodded quickly, eyes shifting to the hallway behind Rachel. "It's not that we don't want to help. It's just, we aren't trained, and we don't have the budget to hire a specialist. And inclusion can be disruptive for the other children." The words landed like rocks in Rachel's stomach. Disruptive. As if her boys, who never even made a sound, could somehow be a threat to the harmony of a classroom. "I'm not asking for miracles," she said, trying to stay calm. "I'll provide interpreters. I'll volunteer myself. I'll work with the teachers. They deserve to be here." But Mrs. Gleason just sighed and shook her head. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Carter. The answer is no." That was the moment Rachel realized. This wasn't about logistics. It was about fear, rejection, cowardice hidden behind politeness. Leaving the school that day, Rachel held Liam and Noah's hands tightly as they walked through the parking lot. The boys didn't understand what had happened, but they sensed their mother's stiffness, her silence. Noah signed a simple question: "Are we bad?" Rachel dropped to her knees right there, in the middle of the school lot, and wrapped her arms around both of them. "No," she signed back firmly. "You are good. You are beautiful. They're the ones who are blind." She kissed the tops of their heads, then stood tall. If the school wouldn't take them, she'd teach them herself. And she did. Every morning. She sat them at the kitchen table and turned the dining room into a classroom. Colors, numbers, letters, all taught with her hands, her patience, and her heart. But it wasn't just the school. The town itself began rejecting them more openly. At the grocery store, she noticed the cashier no longer made eye contact. People moved their carts away from hers. One afternoon, she reached for a can of soup, and a woman next to her muttered under her breath, "That's the one with the mute kids." Rachel turned to face her, but the woman walked away before she could say anything. The whispers grew bolder, the stares sharper. Derek told her to ignore it. "They're small-minded," he said. "They'll get over it." But Rachel could tell. This wasn't a phase. It was becoming something permanent. The final straw came at the town's Sunday picnic. It had always been a cherished tradition. Families gathering at the park, kids playing games, parents gossiping under shade trees. Rachel hesitated about going, but decided her kids deserved normalcy. She packed a blanket, some snacks, and walked with the children into the park. For a few minutes, it felt okay. Ava ran toward the playground. Grace clapped silently at a butterfly. Liam and Noah watched other children throw a ball. But then Rachel saw them, two mothers whispering near the lemonade table, eyes fixed on her family. One of them, a woman named June Abernathy, who used to attend Rachel's baby showers, crossed her arms and said loudly, "Enough for others to hear. They don't belong here. It's not safe." The words froze Rachel in place. "What did you say?" she asked. June didn't flinch. "If something happens to them, who's responsible? They can't even call for help." Rachel wanted to scream, to shake the woman and demand humanity. But all she did was walk over to her children, gather their things, and leave. She didn't want her kids to see her break. But when they got home, she sat on the bathroom floor and cried silently, until the tile under her went cold. She wasn't just losing community, she was being erased from it. The people who once welcomed her now treated her like a plague. Derek came home late that night, smelled the salt on her cheeks, and said nothing. He just hugged her from behind. For a moment, Rachel let herself lean on him, but she also knew, if the world was going to change, it wouldn't be because of pity. It would be because she refused to back down. Rachel tried to meet with town officials. She made appointments, left voicemails, even sent handwritten letters. No one responded. Her calls went unanswered. One day, she showed up at the town hall unannounced, children in tow. She waited outside the mayor's office for over an hour, but he never came out. His secretary told her he had an emergency. As she turned to leave, she heard someone in the hallway mutter, "She's still trying. Poor thing." That moment hurt more than any insult. Not because it was cruel, but because it was laced with condescension. The town had made up its mind. Rachel's fight wasn't noble. It was pathetic. A woman out of place, trying to force her family into a world that didn't want them. The rejection took its toll. Rachel's energy faded. Her nights stretched longer. Her patience thinned. She became quieter, more mechanical. The fire inside her wasn't gone, but it flickered now, dimmer. Still, she never gave up on the children. Each day she taught them something new, signed every word, praised every gesture. The kids were thriving, despite everything. But Rachel was growing tired, bone-tired, soul-tired. She missed being able to walk into a store and not feel the weight of 1,000 stares. She missed laughing without guilt. She missed feeling like she belonged somewhere, anywhere. Then came the letter from the landlord. Effective immediately, the Carters would need to vacate the property by the end of the month. No reason given. Rachel read it 3 times, heart thudding in her chest. She called the landlord, but he didn't answer. She walked to his office, but it was locked. No one would speak to her, not even the neighbors. That night, she sat on the porch as the kids slept, watching the stars with dry eyes. She had nothing left to say. The first door had closed with a quiet no. Now others were slamming shut without warning. Rachel wasn't sure how many more she could take, but she knew one thing. If every door in Pine Valley closed to her family, she'd build a new one with her own. 2 hands, even if she had to do it alone. Rachel Carter didn't break when the eviction notice came. She didn't scream or fall apart. Instead, she folded the paper quietly, slipped it into the drawer beside the sink, and began calculating. She had 30 days. 30 days to find a place for 5 deaf children and 2 adults in a town that had made it painfully clear they weren't welcome. 30 days to save what little she had left. Derek sat across from her, shoulders hunched, eyes tired. He didn't offer a plan. He just stared. The silence between them, once comforting, now felt like a noose tightening. Rachel took out a pen, grabbed an old notepad, and wrote 2 words at the top. Next steps. She didn't know what they were yet, but writing them made her feel like she still had control. She started with what she knew. Her strengths. She could sew. She could clean. She could cook. And most importantly, she didn't have the luxury of waiting. That same night, while the children slept, Rachel took out her sewing machine from the closet and began mending old clothes, baby onesies, blankets, coats with holes. She worked until her fingers cramped. Then she walked into town the next morning, face straight, shoulders square, and went door to door. "Do you have anything that needs mending?" she asked. Most said no. A few shut the door in her face. One woman handed her a jacket, hesitating before saying, "Don't tell anyone I let you in." Rachel didn't care. She needed the work. She stitched by night, delivered by morning, and knocked on every door that didn't have Margaret Hale's name on the mailbox. Margaret Hale. That name had become poison in Rachel's mind. The wealthiest woman in Pine Valley. The one who owned the land, the shops, the strings to the church. Margaret never threatened Rachel directly, but everyone knew her influence. Stores that once welcomed Rachel now ignored her. Clients who hired her before began ghosting her calls. Even Clara, the sweet old woman who once brought soup during her pregnancy, now avoided eye contact. It was as if the entire town had been told. Helping Rachel Carter meant choosing sides, and nobody wanted to be on the losing side. Rachel could see it in their eyes. Not hatred, but fear. Fear of Margaret. Fear of consequences. She wasn't just fighting poverty now, she was fighting a system. Still, Rachel refused to back down. She started waking up at 4 a.m., leaving breakfast ready for the kids and biking to the other side of town to clean houses before the sun rose. She taught herself how to stretch every dollar, how to reuse everything. Dinner became oatmeal 3 nights a week. She rationed flour, reused diapers, cut cloth into reusable wipes. Some days she skipped meals altogether just so the kids wouldn't feel the hunger. And they didn't complain. Of course they didn't. They couldn't speak. But even if they could, Rachel knew they wouldn't, because they saw the way she looked at them. Not with resentment, never with pity, only fierce, desperate love. Derek, meanwhile, started coming home later and later. He said the mine had reduced hours, but Rachel didn't believe him. He barely spoke anymore. One night he came in drunk, reeking of something cheap, and dropped into a chair without a word. Rachel didn't yell. She just sat across from him, staring. He finally looked up. "What do you want me to do?" he said. "Everything's already falling apart." Rachel's hands trembled, but her voice didn't. "Then don't make it worse," she replied. That night, they didn't sleep in the same bed, and she knew then that the cracks weren't just in the town, they were in her home. But she didn't have time to fix them. Her children needed her more than her marriage did. The worst came when she went to drop off cleaned linens at the town's only inn, a place where she'd been working part-time under the table. The owner, Mr. Henderson, met her at Mr. Henderson, the back entrance, with an apologetic smile. "I'm sorry, Rachel. We can't have you back. Someone complained." She knew who. Margaret Hale. Always in the shadows. Always watching. "I've worked here for almost a year," Rachel said. "I never missed a shift." Mr. Henderson shrugged helplessly. "It's out of my hands." Rachel turned away, face tight, heart pounding. She wanted to scream. She wanted to smash something. But instead, she just walked home in silence. That night, as she tucked Grace and Ava into bed, Rachel felt something inside her shift again. Not break, not yet, but change. The world wasn't going to give them space. She'd have to carve it out herself. She went into the kitchen, grabbed a notebook, and started writing a plan. Not one that depended on favors, not one that relied on mercy. Something she could build herself. Maybe she could sell handmade clothes. Maybe she could start a laundry service from home. Anything to stay ahead of the hunger, the cold, the eviction clock that kept ticking. She didn't need the town to love her. She just needed them to let her survive. But even that, she realized, was becoming too much to ask. With every passing day, it became harder to hide the truth from the children. They saw the empty pantry shelves. They noticed when the lights were turned off early. They watched their mother patch the same clothes again and again. Rachel tried to keep their spirits up, reading to them, playing games with her hands, teaching them new signs. But they weren't blind. They saw her thin face, her tired eyes. One night, Liam signed a single word. "Tired." Rachel smiled and nodded. "A little," she signed back. But inside she felt hollow. No one was coming to save them. Not the town, not the church, not even Derek, who now seemed more like a ghost than a partner. Still, she endured, because that's what survival demanded. When she had nothing left to sell, she pawned her wedding ring. When the food ran out, she boiled rice in water and called it soup. She even tried knocking on Clara's door again, hoping the woman would show an ounce of courage. But Clara didn't open the door, just whispered from behind it, "I can't help you, Rachel. I'm sorry." Rachel didn't cry. Not anymore. She just walked home through the dark, head high, jaw clenched. The fight for survival was no longer about pride. It was about keeping 5 children alive in a town determined to erase them. As the final week of the eviction deadline approached, Rachel stood on the porch, staring out at Pine Valley. The same town where she'd once believed her children would grow up. The same place that now treated them like a curse. She thought about running, about disappearing. But where would they go? Who would take in a single mother with 5 deaf children and no income? She didn't know. But she knew one thing for certain. She would not let this town win. Not yet. Not ever. If Pine Valley was going to destroy her family, they'd have to rip it from her hands. Rachel Carter never imagined a moment of desperation would become the start of something bigger. It happened late one night after the kids had gone to sleep, their small bodies curled together on the thin mattress they now shared. The house was nearly empty. The pantry had 1 can of beans, and the electric bill lay unpaid on the counter. Rachel sat at the table in silence, the only light coming from an old desk lamp salvaged from the junk pile behind the church. She felt like a ghost, present but unseen. Then her eyes landed on the old camcorder in the corner, buried beneath a pile of unfolded laundry. It belonged to Derek, from before the kids, before the silence, a relic from another life. On impulse, she grabbed it, wiped off the dust, and flipped the switch. To her surprise, it turned on. The battery was nearly dead, but the red light blinked to life. Rachel stood there, staring at it, unsure what she was doing. Then she turned the lens toward the children's room and pressed record. She filmed the small pile of blankets where her 5 children slept. No crying, no snoring, just peace. Then she flipped the camera around and looked into it. Her eyes were sunken, her skin pale. "This is what strength looks like," she said, voice trembling. 5 children who the world won't see. But I do. I see them. She paused. "And if you're watching this, maybe now you do too." She turned it off. Just a spark, a flicker. But something had moved inside her. The next day she borrowed a neighbor's laptop, one of the few still speaking to her, and uploaded the footage to a free video platform under an anonymous name, Quiet Hearts, Strong Hands. Rachel didn't expect anyone to watch it, but 3 days later, an email pinged in the inbox she hadn't checked in weeks. Then, another, and another. Messages from people across the country, parents of deaf children, teachers, therapists. Some cried watching the clip. Others offered advice, resources, support. One woman wrote, "My daughter is deaf. I thought we were alone. Thank you." Rachel stared at the screen, numb. Something was happening. For the first time since Pine Valley turned its back, strangers, total strangers, were seeing her children for who they really were. Not cursed, not broken, just different, beautifully, defiantly different. Within 2 weeks, the video had been shared thousands of times. Advocacy groups started tagging her. Someone asked if they could translate it into other languages. Rachel was overwhelmed. It was like someone had opened a window in a room she didn't know she was trapped in. She began filming more. Small clips, the children drawing, learning sign language, helping each other, laughing in their silent way. She didn't narrate. She didn't explain. She just showed them living, breathing, growing, and people responded. One comment stood out. "This is what the world needs to see. Not pity, power." Rachel cried reading that one. Not because it made her sad, but because it felt true. The attention didn't solve everything. They were still getting evicted. Food was still scarce. Derek was still drifting. But something had changed inside her. For so long, Rachel had been fighting just to be seen. Now the world wasn't just seeing them. It was listening, even without sound. A woman from Chicago offered to send Rachel a refurbished laptop. A nonprofit mailed a box of groceries. Someone else sent picture books with sign language guides. The children opened the packages with wide eyes, fingers flying with signs for gift and thank you. Rachel filmed it all. Every small joy, every little triumph, and uploaded them one by one. Soon, local advocates from the nearest city reached out. They invited Rachel to a parent support meeting in Riverport, 3 hours away. At first, she hesitated. Gas money was tight. The children were young. But something told her this was the next step. So she packed peanut butter sandwiches, filled the tank with her last $20, and made the drive. That meeting changed everything. For the first time, she sat in a room with people who understood, who didn't flinch when she said, "They're all deaf," who didn't recoil when she mentioned her town's rejection. Instead, they nodded. They shared stories. They offered contacts, speech therapists, legal aid, early intervention specialists. On the drive back, Rachel gripped the steering wheel tighter. Her chest ached, not from sadness, but from something she hadn't felt in months: belief. There were people out there who cared. Maybe not in Pine Valley, but in the world beyond it. People who saw her kids as worth fighting for. When she got home, Derek was on the porch, eyes red. "You were gone all day," he said. She nodded. "I had to be." She didn't explain. She didn't need to. That night, she sat on the floor with the kids and taught them a new word in sign: hope. Ava signed it back to her, beaming. Grace followed, then the others. Rachel smiled, tears in her eyes. They had a new word now, one they would need in the days ahead. But news travels fast, even to the corners of Pine Valley. People began whispering again. This time, not about curses, but about the attention Rachel was getting, about the video, about the gifts. Margaret Hale, ever watchful, caught wind of it and was not pleased. That week, Rachel received a visit from a county official. They, too, claimed it was a routine inspection, asked invasive questions, checked for safety violations. Rachel knew what it was: intimidation, a warning. But she didn't budge. She answered every question, stood tall, and filmed the entire interaction. Then she posted it. "This is what happens when a mother refuses to disappear," she captioned it. And the views exploded. The video went viral. Local news picked it up, then national media. People started asking, "Who is this woman in Pine Valley? Why is the town trying to silence her?" Journalists called. Talk shows emailed. Rachel declined most of them. She didn't want fame. She wanted safety, dignity, a future for her kids. But the spotlight had found her, and this time she wasn't running. She realized something vital. Maybe she didn't need to beg Pine Valley to accept her family. Maybe she just needed to show the world what Pine Valley refused to see. And maybe, just maybe, someone with real power would start paying attention. Leaving Pine Valley wasn't something Rachel Carter had planned. It was something survival demanded. After months of knocking on doors that refused to open, of smiling at people who turned away, and raising 5 deaf children in a place that treated silence like a disease, she realized the future her kids needed could no longer be built in that town. The videos had given her hope. The messages from strangers had proven the world was wider than Pine Valley's fences. When the eviction date finally came, she didn't cry. She packed their few belongings, tied together with rope and prayer, and loaded them into Derek's old pickup truck. He stood on the porch, eyes downcast, not saying a word. Rachel didn't ask him to come. She simply said, "I'm going." And with that, she drove away from the town that had never been home. Her destination was Riverport, the city where the support group had welcomed her like an equal. It wasn't far in distance, just 3 hours, but it felt like another planet. Pine Valley had been narrow streets, quiet judgment, and closed faces. Riverport was loud, diverse, busy. No one stared at her children in the grocery store. No one whispered when she signed at the dinner table. The change was disorienting at first, but Rachel adjusted quickly. She found a room for rent in a rundown complex on the edge of town. It was barely big enough for the 6 of them, but it was safe. That was all that mattered. The kids shared 2 mattresses, their belongings in plastic crates, their toys made from scraps. But at night, they slept peacefully. And for the first time in years, Rachel didn't sleep with one eye open. She took work where she could get it, cleaning offices at dawn, cooking in a diner kitchen during lunch shifts, folding laundry at a hotel on weekends. She never stopped moving. But this time, her exhaustion wasn't weighed down by humiliation. It felt like progress. She had a new goal now, not just to survive, but to help her children thrive. And Riverport gave her tools she'd never had before. The local deaf center offered free ASL classes. Volunteers met with her kids twice a week to work on social skills and language. They connected her to a public school with a specialized classroom. When Rachel toured it for the first time, Her knees nearly buckled. The walls were covered in sign charts. The teacher greeted her in ASL. "You're welcome here," she signed. Rachel barely managed to nod. Liam and Noah started school the following week. Rachel was terrified they'd be overwhelmed, that other students would mock them, or that they wouldn't understand the structure. But instead they adapted quickly. The classroom had a calm rhythm. Visual, timers, picture schedules, clear expectations. And for once they weren't the only deaf kids in the room. The teacher sent Rachel home a note after the first day. "Your boys are incredible." They helped another student feel brave enough to sign his name for the first time. Rachel sat in the parking lot and cried. Not from pain, but from a strange, foreign feeling. Pride that wasn't tangled in sadness. Grace, Ava, and Ben were still too young for formal schooling, but the center gave them space during the day for play therapy. Rachel watched them bloom in ways she didn't know were possible. Ava began drawing on everything: walls, napkins, her arms. Rachel bought her a sketch pad and watched as she filled it with vivid scenes. Houses, people, animals, all signed with little hand symbols beside them. Ben built towers out of plastic cups. Grace took to storytelling with her hands, mimicking the signs of the volunteers. They were becoming their own people, and Rachel was finally getting to see who they were beneath the weight of rejection. Rachel started recording again, this time not in desperation, but celebration. She filmed Grace's storytelling, Ava's drawings, Liam showing Noah how to fingerspell his name. The world responded once more, even louder. People shared the new clips, calling them windows into courage, testaments to resilience. A non-profit organization reached out, offering Rachel a part-time communications role managing their online advocacy page. She hesitated. She hadn't worked on a computer in years, but they trained her. It became the first job she had that didn't require a mop or a rag. Her first paycheck felt unreal. She took the kids out for pizza to celebrate, and they signed every order with joy. But just as Rachel began to find her footing, an envelope arrived in the mail. No return address. Inside, a letter written in cold, practiced script. "Your story has been inspiring. Perhaps it's time to return and make things right where it all began. Pine Valley still watches you. No signature, no threat, just a statement." But it rattled her. That night, she sat by the window, letter in hand, and stared into the darkness. Derek hadn't called, hadn't asked about the kids. She hadn't seen him since the day she drove away. But somehow, Pine Valley still clung to her like smoke. She wondered, was it worth going back? Could anything be reclaimed there, or was this just another trap? Rachel brought the letter to her support group that week. One woman, Marta, an older mother who'd once lived through a custody battle for her disabled son, read it and frowned. "That's not an invitation. That's control," she said. "Don't let them pull you back unless it's on your terms." Rachel nodded, but her mind kept spinning. What if returning could show her children how far they'd come? What if facing Pine Valley again wasn't a step back, but a final step forward? She didn't want revenge. She wanted closure. A clean line between the life they had and the life they were building now. After days of thought, she sat the kids down and signed slowly, carefully. "Would you want to visit the place we used to live? Just once, to show them who you are now?" The children looked at each other. Liam raised his hand first. He signed, "Yes." The others followed. Rachel smiled faintly. They weren't scared anymore. Maybe she shouldn't be either. And so, she made a plan. A brief visit, a weekend trip, just long enough to walk through the streets that once turned their backs and let those streets see what they missed. Pine Valley hadn't changed, but Rachel had. And now so had her children. Rachel had prepared herself for a cold welcome. But what she didn't expect was the illusion of warmth. When she and her children returned to Pine Valley, it wasn't under cover of darkness or in secret. They arrived in daylight. The truck she borrowed from a volunteer was old but clean, with a bright, blue coat of paint. As she pulled onto the familiar cracked roads, she saw faces peering out from windows. Curious, cautious, but not hostile. It was confusing. After everything, why weren't they being chased out again? When she reached the old church, the same one that had shut them out years ago, the Reverend, Father Hale, stood waiting at the entrance with a smile on his face. "Rachel Carter," he said, hands open. "You've returned." She stepped out slowly, watching him with eyes sharpened by years of survival. Her children followed behind her, now older, more confident, standing in a tight formation around their mother like a shield. Hale looked them over and gave a slow nod, as if pretending this was a moment of celebration. "I've heard of the things you've done. The videos, the work. Quite remarkable," he said. Rachel didn't reply. She simply signed to her children to stay close. "Why am I really here?" she asked. Hale smiled wider. "Because the town wants to reconcile. We've changed, Rachel." But she knew that wasn't true. Pine Valley didn't change. It hid its hate better. Over the next 24 hours, Rachel was paraded through the town. Shop owners smiled. Some offered bread or flowers. The mayor invited her to a small gathering at the town hall. It felt fake, too smooth, too orchestrated. And then, during the reception, she saw her, Margaret Hale, standing near the back of the room, arms folded, her eyes scanning the Carters like they were pests that somehow made it back into a cleaned house. Margaret didn't approach. She didn't need to. Her presence was enough. Rachel felt her stomach twist. This wasn't healing. This was theater. The trap snapped shut when Rachel was asked to speak. The mayor handed her a microphone and said, "We'd love for you to say a few words about forgiveness and gratitude." The crowd applauded gently. Rachel stood frozen. She looked out at the faces, the same ones that turned her away from schools, from stores, from shelter. Her fingers tightened around the microphone. She thought about saying nothing, about walking away, but she raised the mic. "I'm not here for closure," she said. "I'm here because my children wanted to see the place that tried to erase them." The room fell silent. We survived, not because of this town, but in spite of it. The silence cracked, and Rachel could hear murmurs rising. The mayor shifted, uncomfortably. Hale forced a smile. Margaret still said nothing, but her face was unreadable. Rachel continued, "You offered us nothing. Not safety, not dignity. You let us starve and sleep in alleys while you whispered about curses, and now you applaud because we didn't disappear." The tension thickened. She lowered the mic, nodded once, and walked out. Her children followed, heads high. But outside, near the back of the hall, Father Hale caught up with her. "Rachel," he said, "you didn't have to be so harsh. We were trying to honor you." She turned to him, eyes cold. "You didn't want to honor us. You wanted to own the story." And then he said it, quiet, almost casual. "People don't forget their place, Rachel, especially not when they come back too proud." The words hit like ice. There it was, the real face beneath the mask. "Is that a threat?" she asked. "It's Pine Valley," he replied. "You know how things work." That night, Rachel locked the motel room door 3 times. She sat awake with the children curled around her, the letter from Hale still echoing in her mind. This wasn't reconciliation. It was resentment, hidden behind a performance. They hadn't brought her back to make peace. They wanted to remind her she still didn't belong. The next morning she found her truck vandalized. The windshield was cracked, the tires slashed. Spray paint across the side read, "Go back to your silence." Rachel didn't scream. She didn't panic. She simply woke the children, packed their things, and carried them to the bus station. They would not be staying a minute longer. Pine Valley hadn't changed. It had only become more cunning. Rachel knew now. It wasn't about forgiveness. It was about control, about appearances, and she had shattered their illusion by surviving. Before leaving, Rachel took one final step. She uploaded everything: the speech, the photos, a short video of the truck, the slurs, the motel clerk apologizing with trembling hands. The world responded instantly. People were outraged. Influencers reposted it. News stations called. Rachel didn't give. Interviews. She let the truth speak for itself. Her final caption was simple: "They didn't want us to come back, so we won't. But now everyone knows what they did." And with that, she and her children left Pine Valley behind for the last time. No regrets, no fear, just the truth, and a future that would never again depend on being accepted by those who had once shut every door in their face. The road back to Riverport was quiet, but not peaceful. Rachel Carter sat at the back of the crowded bus, her 5 children nestled close beside her. their heads leaning against each other as they slept. She watched the countryside roll by through the cracked window, her reflection faintly visible in the glass. She didn't recognize herself anymore, not in a bad way, but in a changed way. Stronger maybe, sharper. The past few days had peeled away the final layer of hope she still had for Pine Valley. Not even closure had been possible. The town hadn't wanted to understand. It had wanted to absorb her triumph, repackage it as their own redemption. And when she refused, it lashed out. But they had underestimated her. Again. When they arrived back in Riverport, it was already dark. The children were exhausted, their bodies stiff from the ride, but none of them complained. Rachel carried Ava in her arms and held Ben's hand as they made their way through the station. Her phone buzzed nonstop. Messages, alerts, shares. The video had exploded. The world was watching. But Rachel didn't want attention. She wanted safety. And so, she turned it all off. She guided her children down familiar sidewalks, the streetlights casting long shadows. There was a small apartment waiting for them, donated by a local disability advocacy group. A volunteer left the key under the mat and a note on the door. Welcome home. Rachel smiled at the words, though her chest still felt tight. That night, after the children had eaten and curled up on blankets in the living room, Rachel stepped out onto the tiny balcony. She needed air, clarity. She stared at the city skyline in the distance, breathing slow. The events of the last week played on a loop in her mind, the fake smiles, the slashed tires, the whispered warnings. The town may have shut its doors, but Rachel had burned the hinges on the way out. And now what? She couldn't live in fear, couldn't move forward if her past kept chasing her. She looked down at her hands, calloused, lined, scarred, but steady. She had made it this far. Made it. She would not turn back. 2 days later, she received an unexpected call. A woman from a national nonprofit had seen her story and wanted to offer a grant, enough money to start a community project for children with disabilities. A center, a safe space, a future. Rachel was stunned. She didn't speak. Right away. Why me? She asked. The woman replied, because you already built something out of nothing. All we want to do is help you do it again. With tools this time. Rachel didn't cry. She nodded, thanked her, and got to work. She spent the next weeks planning, meeting with contractors, scouting, locations. She consulted with teachers, therapists, and parents. It was the most focused she had felt in years. But just when things were aligning, the past came clawing again. One evening, while walking home from a meeting, Rachel sensed someone following her. She turned. A man in a dark coat stood across the street, watching. She tightened her grip on her bag and kept walking. The next day, a note appeared at her door. Don't forget where you came from. No signature, just like the last one. She brought it inside, placed it on the table, and stared at it. The town might have let her go, physically, but it wanted to haunt her psychologically. Fear crawled up her spine, but she refused to let it take root. She pulled out a match, lit the note on fire, and watched it burn in the sink. Ashes. That's all their threats deserved now. The following week, Rachel's new center opened its doors. In a converted library. It wasn't big, but it was bright and open. On the first day, 15 children arrived, some deaf, some with developmental delays, some who had never been in a place built for them. Rachel welcomed them all. Her own children helped lead group activities. Grace told a story in sign language. Liam and Noah taught the alphabet with their hands. Ava led an art project, and Ben organized the books. It was chaotic, it was beautiful, and it was theirs. After the last family left, Rachel stood in the center of the room, tears slipping down her cheeks. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was building. But that night, a shadow fell again. Someone had set fire to the donation box outside. The blaze had been small, quickly put out by a neighbor, but the message was clear. Rachel arrived the next morning to find the metal frame scorched, the words, fraud, spray-painted, across the front window. The police took her statement, but offered little else. Might be a random act, they said. Rachel knew better. Pine Valley's poison had found a new path. She sat in the center's office, shaking. For the first time in months, she felt that same helpless heat rise in her chest. But then Grace walked in, held her hand, and signed, "We're not afraid." Rachel pulled her daughter close and nodded. Neither was she. Rachel installed cameras, reinforced the doors, set up a volunteer night watch. The community rallied. Donations doubled. Messages poured in from families across the country. They had seen the vandalism. They were angry. But more than that, they were inspired. Rachel had become more than a mother fighting for her children. She was now a symbol of resistance, of possibility, of survival through fire. She didn't want to be anyone's hero. She just wanted her children to grow up never doubting their worth, never questioning their right to exist. That was her mission. That was her battle. And she wasn't backing down. The fire had been meant to scare her, to send her running, but it only lit something deeper. Rachel stood in front of the center that evening, looking at the burn marks, and smiled. "Let them come," she whispered. "We're not hiding anymore." Her children stood beside her, silent but solid. No tears, no fear, just footsteps on the pavement, just breath in their lungs, just firelight behind their eyes. Rachel wasn't the woman who fled Pine Valley anymore. She was the woman who faced fire and kept walking. And now, her footsteps would lead others out of the darkness too. 25 years after Rachel Carter was driven out of Pine Valley, the town looked almost the same. The streets had been repaved, a few shops had new awnings, and there was a shiny new city hall. But the buildings still cast the same long shadows. The whispers still rode the wind. The same stained glass church stood in the square, and Margaret Hale's old estate, now in foreclosure, sat behind a rusted iron gate. Time had changed the surface, but the soul of the town remained the same, cautious, prideful, slow to forgive, and even slower to admit wrong. And yet, on this warm afternoon, Pine Valley was full of people standing still, watching, waiting, not out of fear, but out of awe. Because Rachel Carter had returned, she didn't come alone. A line of sleek black cars rolled into town behind her. Out stepped 5 figures, grown, polished, confident. The children who were once called cursed were now something else entirely. Liam, a leading designer of communication technology, had flown in from San Francisco. Noah, now a head chef and restaurant owner, had closed his business for the day just to be here. Grace, internationally recognized for her visual storytelling and sign language, wore a simple black dress and carried a portfolio of her published work. Ben had become a published author and motivational speaker. Ava, now an advocate for disability rights, worked with governments around the world to create inclusive education policies. They walked beside their mother, not as victims, but as visionaries. The townspeople whispered, but no one dared speak aloud. They watched as Rachel stepped onto the newly built steps of the Pine Valley Community Center. A banner hung above the doors, written in bold, clear letters, "Carter Center for Children with Hearing Loss." Rachel held the ribbon in one hand and a pair of scissors in the other. Before cutting it, she turned to face the crowd. "You tried to silence us," she said, her voice calm but unwavering. "You tried to make us feel small, but we didn't disappear. We grew, and now we return, not to take revenge, but to leave something better behind." There was no applause at first, just silence, deep, honest. And then slowly, hands began to come together, not clapping, signing, the sign for respect. Dozens of people did it, then hundreds. The entire square began to move in a quiet, synchronized wave. Rachel's eyes welled with tears, but she didn't break. She nodded once, then turned and cut the ribbon. The crowd erupted, not in noise, but in movement. Her children stood behind her, signing proudly. This wasn't just the opening of a building. It was the burial of a curse. Later that afternoon, Margaret Hale appeared, frail, gray-haired, wrapped in a coat too heavy for the season. She walked slowly, alone, through the crowd that once followed her commands. No one helped her. No one stopped her. She made her way toward Rachel, eyes narrowed. "You've made a spectacle," she said bitterly. Rachel looked at her, calm. "No," she replied. "I made a legacy." Margaret opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She lowered her eyes and walked away, unnoticed, unimportant, irrelevant. As the sun began to set, Rachel sat with her children in the garden behind the center. The walls were covered in artwork, handprints, photographs. There were benches designed with Braille engravings. Wind chimes made by deaf students hung from the trees, their beauty not in the sound, but in the shimmer. Liam placed a hand on his mother's shoulder. "We did it," he signed. Rachel smiled. "No," she signed back. "You did." And it was true. They had carried the story forward, carved something permanent from the silence they were born into, turned rejection into strength. Reporters asked for interviews. Rachel declined. "Let the work speak for itself," she said. She didn't need her face in magazines. She needed classrooms to open their doors. She needed families like hers to know they weren't alone. That was enough. That was everything. That night, after the crowd left, she walked through the halls of the center alone. She paused at the doorway of each room, touching the frames. Classrooms, therapy rooms, art spaces, all built for the future. A future no longer waiting for permission to exist. Standing by the main window, she saw the reflection of her past self, the young mother in tattered clothes begging for a place to stay, holding 5 silent babies in her arms. That version of her was gone, not erased, just transformed. Rachel whispered into the empty hallway. "We didn't just survive, we became." And she meant every word. She had been thrown out, disgraced, ignored. But now she had returned as a builder, a protector, a leader, unbreakable. The last light faded. Rachel closed the door, locked it, and turned toward the quiet street. Her children stood waiting. Together they walked into the night, no longer haunted by silence but carrying it with pride, because silence in their hands had become a language of power, a voice that couldn't be shut out, and a story that, no matter who tried to bury it, had already reshaped the world. If this story moved you, don't forget to hit the like button, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and subscribe to Mr. Edward's Tales for more powerful true stories. And hey, send this video to someone who needs to see what strength really looks like.